under classified cover, top secret, compartmentalized, with those kind of aircraft and this kind of intentionality and motive, unchecked, as Senator Inouye said, unchecked by the government, unchecked by the president, unchecked by the Congress, unchecked by the bosses at the Pentagon, you're in a very, very dangerous situation because you're not dealing with jet aircraft and Sikorsky helicopters. You're dealing with, or Chinooks or whatever, Blackhawks. You're dealing with very advanced technologies, they call them ATs, that have been reverse engineered and studied since the 40s. And they're in multiple generations of refinement from the 40s to the 50s on those technologies. But you're also dealing with weapon systems that are electromagnetic pulse and scalar, so-called scalar weapon systems that are way outgun anything a B-2 stealth has, or a kinetic missile, or a laser. And you're also then dealing with, let's call it, deceptive indications and warnings, stagecraft, to stage events where it looks like the conventional U.S. would encounter an alien force, when in reality it's this covert human group, because they have that level of technology to simulate alien.
Are we working with
So
aliens?
all of this gets, this is complicated stuff. It's sort of like if someone were to write a novel on what happened on 9/11 with those towers falling, no one would have believed it. It would have been such rubbish. After it happened, people said, you wouldn't have believed this if it had been a novel. Everything I'm telling you is true, but it seems absolutely over the top unbelievable.
Well, yeah, when you talk about moon bases, when you talk about moon bases and you talk about Antarctica and the secret bases in Antarctica, and we talk about working with aliens, it sounds fantastical and people can't wrap their brains around it, but it's true.
I know. Yeah, it's true.
It's amazing. Are we working with aliens right now? Does the United States have a relationship on these Black Project programs working with extraterrestrials?
There are people in those operations who think they are, but what they're actually working with are another compartment's man-made ones. All right. So now we're getting into my domain of very high-end electronics, high-end bio-nanotechnologies, biological systems, and what have you. We don't talk about this much, but if you are only read into a certain level of this and you're at Area 51 and you encounter something, you're going to think it's an ET, and it isn't. So this gets to be a rather complicated hall of mirrors. And it's whatever you think this covert human group might have, multiply it times 20, 30, 100, and that's what they actually have. So, for example, there's a facility in the center of Australia near Pine Gap and also at the Four Corners area in Dulce where these creatures are manufactured. I know physicists and people who worked on them. They look like aliens. They would fool anyone. So if you run across some of these critters in an underground base, you're going to think, oh my God, there's a group of these aliens working with, well, no, they're not. Now, in the 1940s and 50s, actual extraterrestrials did reach out. And my understanding, Eisenhower had a meeting, and so did Truman, with actual ETs, where they were asking that we stand down the proliferation of these nuclear weapons, because when those are detonated, they release an electromagnetic pulse, but they also, attending with that, piggybacked on it, is a scalar pulse that totally disrupts interstellar communications and travel. This gets into some of what Dr. Zohari talked about at our conference that weekend before the National Press Club event. And by the way, that entire 2-day conference is available in a webinar on our site if you want to see it. And also what Eric Hecker was talking about with the neutrino light systems. These are not at speed of light. These are at multiples of the speed of light. So the ETs did appeal for us to stand those down, and we're offering to help. But Eisenhower lost control of the whole process after 1956, and that endeavor went sideways. I know the history of this very well. Back in the 90s, the first gathering of top secret witnesses we had at Asilomar in California, there were folks who literally had been at the Roswell event still living and had been involved in that Eisenhower era. They're dead now, but we have their testimony. It's in the archive.
Well, that's why on
and they aren't.
his farewell speech, he knew that this had gotten away from him, right? I mean, this
Oh,
is what
totally. Yeah.
him admitting, beware the military-industrial complex, and he was aware at that point that it had already gotten away from him. It had metastasized.
And I want to point out here that that view does not indicate an anti-military or anti-government stance. It's talking about the illegal part of it. Because, I want to be very clear. The biggest support we have are very heroic military guys like you saw come forward. And many of the worst victims of this secrecy and this
Right.
secret organization are military and intelligence people, even CIA people. It's highly compartmentalized. The big problem, same thing with the aerospace industry. There's a lot going on in the aerospace industry that's legitimate. So you cannot throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. You have to have a discernment to understand where you've crossed the line from legally overseeing operations, even black budget. I'm working with a guy who literally manages the black budget of the United States. He was never read into this, never briefed on it.
Wow.
Okay, the top guy. All right, so because of that, because of my experience with that, I tell people to be very careful about painting everyone with the same brush.
Right.
You cannot tar and feather everyone, because in reality, it's a relatively small elite, very, very compartmented criminal operation. And there are people in that operation who are just, yes, sir, they're going to do what they're told to do. They're not people who are part of the management. And frankly, the guys I'm working with who they've been in there for 10 years, they had no idea that the management of it was at the top completely being run illegally, because they're in a compartment operation doing as they're told. Whether they're a scientist or whether they're someone in an aerospace industry or a Delta Force guy or a Navy SEAL, they're doing what they're told to do. They don't know that the president and the Congress and even some of the top brass at the Pentagon have been decapitated from this, that it's been completely severed. And that's the problem that has to get fixed, because an unsupervised entity that has this kind of top technology and malice, and frankly, I will be blunt with you. I had a conversation with one of these non-official cover guys a couple weeks ago. And he says the people that are recruited into that end of it are screened for being sociopaths and psychopaths.
That's how you get
Period.
into it. To
Yes.
be on your resume, you have to be a psychopath.
Yes, you have to be smart, you have to be capable, but you have to be a sociopath or a psychopath. So that is your entry ticket right there. And that is screened very, very carefully. And this is why, when I briefed in the United Kingdom, Lord Hill Norton, who was a 5-star admiral, they used to call him a Sea Lord. He had been head of the Ministry of Defense, as well as the head of the military committee at NATO and MI5 and MI6. He told me that he was never read in, and he was furious as to why. I said, Admiral, with all due respect, what would you have done if you had found out there was a criminal operation doing all these things that you and I just talked about? He said, I wouldn't have stood for a bloody damn minute. And he jumped up out of his chair. I was at his home out in Hampshire. And I said, sir, that's why they didn't tell you. They knew. I'm a doctor, so I call it a soul biopsy. They did a psychological analysis of you and knew that you were a stand-up guy, patriotic, honest. You would not have stood for it. In which case they would not read you in, because you wouldn't stay on the dark side of the law, on the illegal end of it. And you would have blown the whistle on it, then they'd have to probably kill you or do something to neutralize you. So that is the criteria. And it's very simple. People make this very complicated. It really isn't. You have to have certain capabilities and a certain sociopathic willingness to do very immoral and illegal things.
Well, that comports with what I've heard from other insiders who've talked to me about the people that were marshaling them around or handling them, using that terminology, handling them. They describe them as psychopaths, psychotic. People who could look through, you almost could look through them. Mm-hmm. They were so dark, these types of people. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that multiple times.
And yet in those systems, like this guy who's coming forward, who's a knock, he is actually not a sociopath, but he's got brought up through the system. He's over on that other side.
Right.
So, and a fairly high level.
Right.
So the question is, those sorts of folks, they need to be protected. They need to be empowered to assist with this process. And what I'm worried about, and I've said this to the folks who are advising the Senate and the House, because I deal directly with them, is that you need to put these provisions in an amendment to the Defense Authorization Act that very clearly provides not only the protection for pensions and amnesty, but physical protection for the folks who want to come forward because they have families.
Right.
You know, and some of them have children that are still minors, and they are afraid. And I said, look, if you're working with my group here, you don't need to be afraid, because I'll just say this. We have it in place that anyone touches anyone helping me do this, it's a mutual assured destruction button. Anything happens to us, those guys are gone. They're done. Done. Look in my eyes. This is what the truth looks like. They are done. So, but it doesn't absolve the psychology of people who have been intimidated, have seen people thrown out of helicopters. You know, like Mr. Herrera, the Marine in Indonesia. He was flat out told, we're going to execute all of you if you ever speak about this. And if you look at the email we presented, that one of his buddies that he tried to get come forward with him when I was bringing him over to the skiff at the Pentagon, or handing him off to be brought, they said, I don't want you to tell me anything about this. This is too dangerous. I have a family. So look, I think here's another problem with people in Congress and the White House. They don't think that the entity that is managing this is that sociopathic. They haven't gotten that memo yet. They can't believe. Honestly, it's a matter of getting it into your paradigm, because they've gone from thinking, like Mr. Rubio and others in Congress were going, well, maybe that thing that we were chasing off the coast of California was from China. Well, it came out of the Lockheed. I can show you where it was launched out of the desert in the Mojave Desert. We have a photo of it. We showed it to the whole public. It's there.
Chinese balloon. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So here's the problem. They went from that to now accepting the fact that these are real, that there are extraterrestrial and man-made, and it needs to get under control. But they aren't quite all the way there yet in understanding the capabilities of this illegal secret government group and their intentionality. Because most people are not sociopaths. It's only 4.5% of the US population are sociopaths and psychopaths. So 95+% aren't. Now, as an emergency doctor, I'll be frank, I dealt with plenty of sociopaths, murderers, rapists, horrible things I don't even talk about. Every day, all day, day in and day out. But most people who are lawyers and businessmen, and they're in the government and they're bureaucrats, they kind of live in a Pollyanna world where I think they honestly can't get their minds around this level of depravity and criminality running under cover of top secret clearances in a paragovernmental entity, because it's a hybrid. This group is a hybrid of corporate, financial, not just US, but around the world, and military and intelligence operations. So you have to look at it as a hybridized entity. Interestingly, if you approach it from a FOIA point of view from the government, they'll just say it's all in a corporate entity that you don't have access to FOIA. If you approach it through a private sector, they'll say, well, this is governmental top secret operations because we're a contractor. They wall it off. They're very clever at these little games they played, where they've been able to outfox the Congress and the Pentagon overseers for 80 years now.
Well, it's my great hope that we will see some major movements on this. And I think,
we are.
No small part to the amazing work that you and your team have done on this, really.
We need your help. Here's my appeal. There are people listening to your show right now, or who know people who are part of, whether it was incidental or not, like Mr. Herrera or Eric Hecker or what have you, or even higher up folks that need to be networked to us. I will assure you that if you don't want your name disclosed, look, I stand in front of the public and disclose only what the people who told me I can. It's like doctor-patient confidentiality. They can approach me, and we will see that your information gets to the right people at the Pentagon and in the Congress and White House. I'm working with a guy at the White House military office on this specific on point. So I think that we'll do that. If you want to come forward publicly, we'll make that happen. Or if you just want to provide me information and not go through any of the above, but if you think it would be useful for me to have, then I would appreciate it. The other thing we need from the public is funding support. And I'll be very honest with you. I'm a retired doctor. We're doing this. If you can imagine this entire project with all the work, we have never had a staff or an office. It's all volunteer. My wife and I, my wife will be 75 years old this December. We do this out of a corner of our living room, out at our farm out in Virginia. And it's a labor of love, but we need help because what we're doing, like when we bring people to DC, the Disclosure Project is paying for their airfare, their security, their drivers, their hotel, everything. We're picking up all that. All the research we're doing, all the briefings, the meetings that we go all over the country to meet with folks, that's all out of pocket. We need people helping with the funding on that. And on our website, there's a button you can hit and make a $5 contribution if you want, or more. And the other is get your friends, link your show to the National Press Club event, but have everyone else link it because of the ownership, the ownership of big media is in the hands of this corrupt enterprise. I'll be very honest with you. Shows like yours and this sort of network that can happen through the internet, social media, that's how we get this information to hundreds of millions of people. And by the way, that's why we've done these documentaries. The one that just came out last week, it's already, it's #1 in the world. It's called The Lost Century and how to reclaim it. It goes through the whole arc of history of the technologies that have been kept secret. And also, more importantly, what do we do to fix that? How do we bring those out so it benefits humanity in our lifetimes? Because, hey, I have 4 children and 12 grandchildren. I'd like to see them have a world better than what we're leaving them right now. But the only way to do that, I wouldn't count on the government or a big corporation disclosing these sciences. I think it needs to be an independent group of people who do it in a high-tech physics lab and engineering effort. Now, this is going to cost $50 to $100 million, which I certainly don't have. But collectively, we could do it. And then open source it. What do I mean by that? We release these technologies so that there's no patent office will seize them. And it's done so quickly, it can't be struck and seized by a national security operation. Why? Because the only way you can bring these technologies out, if you do a normal Silicon Valley or venture capital effort, and you're keeping the technology secret, by the time you begin to stand up distribution on it and manufacturing, it will have been seized. And probably everyone involved may have been killed. So the only way to do it is with the whole world watching. The moment you get breakthroughs in these technologies from an energy lab, it's released over the internet through blockchain, and the plans, everything goes wide. That's our plan. Now, the other request, I think at any given time, there's probably a dozen to 2 dozen of these devices that are free energy, 0-point quantum vacuum technologies, which basically, for your listeners, extract energy from the fabric of space around you. It's estimated that the volume of space inside a coffee cup has enough potential energy to boil off all the oceans of the world. But the question is, how do you tap it? How do you tap that?
Right.
That's the trick. And it's VHV, it's very high voltage systems that create a vector into that pluripotent energy field that is at the baseline of space-time. It gets very physics. But anyway, my point is, if someone has discovered this in their garage or their laboratory university, they should contact us. Because I now have people on my team who will be able to fund moving it forward, provide funding to that person so we can make them whole for their research and move it forward open source. So that's what we're wanting to do also in the next one to 2 years. If we can get these technologies out in the next couple of years, there's a chance it can then begin to change the geopolitical landscape away from the situation now where we're all dependent on oil coming out of terrorist states, uh, and would also solve the world poverty problem in about a generation. Because without that, we're going to continue to have global instability and terrorism, because you can't have 3 billion people who don't have any means to live, or 48% of the population of the world doesn't have indoor plumbing. I mean, those of us in the West are very myopic in not understanding the global situation. To fix those huge problems, we need a global equivalent of a Marshall Plan to move these technologies out, because they should have begun to be deployed when Nikola Tesla discovered this in the early part of the 20th century. J.P. Morgan turned to him and said, if we can't put a meter on it, it's not going to come out. So it's been 100 years, right? It's 100 years of this kind of nonsense. So our civilization is 100 years behind what it should be. Now, we can make that up, but it's going to take a big effort by a lot of good people. And I think also some more serious financial support.
Well, hopefully we can do our part. We did a whole documentary on Tesla and that particular energy that he had discovered and was taken from him. So I would encourage our viewers to go check that out as well. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so the new movie is called The Lost Century, and go check it out on Amazon and other places where you can stream it. The Lost Century and how to recover it, and looking at how we can try to reclaim this 100 years of where we could have had access to this energy and healthcare and all of these major advancements. And I would encourage all of you
about the health.
Yeah, go ahead.
What you said about health. I'm a doctor. I've been in an underground lab where they had these really very advanced energy technologies where they could regrow a limb or severed spinal cord using these technologies. There are extraordinary medical applications in this area. Now,
wait. You were in a lab and you got to see this in this underground lab?
I can't say. It was on a border state. I think it actually crossed into another country underground. But yeah, interestingly, it was a very interesting trip that I took. I was invited to come there. They were working on these technologies. It was very sensitive. And because I was a doctor dealing with this issue, they thought I should see that there were applications for this whole area of science and technology that would be very transformative for medicine and health and healing.
And being kept from all of us, this technology. So the biopharmaceutical complex can continue to make trillions and trillions of dollars and keep it from us. Unbelievable. Yep. Dr. Stephen Greer, I really appreciate your time. Hopefully you'll be a regular guest here on Redacted, and we can work on this together. I mean, I'd love to be able to get this message out there. Great. And whatever we can do here on Redacted to have this unredacted and to bring this to people, consider us allies in this fight. So we appreciate your time tonight, and I really appreciate it.
And I appreciate your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.